This video will show you how to replace the pedal assist sensor and bracket on your bike in the unlikely event that it is damaged or determined to be non-functioning by Rad Power Bikes product support. Today we are working on a 2019 Rad City step-through, but the steps should be the same for most models. You will need an 8mm Allen wrench, a crank puller for standard square taper cranks, clean paper towels or shop towels, a bottom bracket removal tool for the Shimano Isis Drive splined 20 tooth cups, and appropriate adjustable wrench or socket, a quick evaporating solvent such as denatured alcohol, bicycle grease, flat side cutters, blue or medium strength thread locker, a torque wrench with an 8mm Allen bit, a zip tie, a bike stand or a friend to hold the bike if needed, and a replacement pedal assist sensor from Rad Power Bikes. To get the bike ready for maintenance, turn it off, unlock and remove the battery, and discharge remaining power. The pedal assist sensor is located behind the chainring. Start by using an 8mm Allen wrench to remove the crank bolt from the right crank. Have a friend stabilize the bike if needed, and turn the wrench counterclockwise to loosen the bolt. Inspect the threads on the crank and use a paper towel to remove any dirt or grime which can cause damage. To remove the crank, prepare the crank puller so the inner bolt or press is below the outer portion of the tool. Thread the outer portion of the tool into the crank clockwise, carefully by hand. The outer portion of the crank puller should thread easily when properly aligned. Use caution to not cross threads or damage the threads. Using the press of the tool when it is not properly secured can lead to irreversible damage to the crank, so ensure the outer portion threads into the crank fully at least 5 full turns. Use the tool's handle to engage the inner bolt, which will press against the bottom bracket and will eventually, sometimes suddenly, unseat the crank. Use caution and keep fingers clear of the space between the crank and the tool to avoid injury. Pull the right crank and chainring away from the bike and allow the chain to hang out of the way. Remove the tool from the crank by turning the outer portion counterclockwise. Inspect the crank and bottom bracket spindle and contact Rad Power Bikes product support if needed. Hold the left crank in place and carefully rotate and pull the magnet disc off of the spindle. Make note of the disc orientation for reinstallation. Remove the left crank bolt by turning the 8mm Allen wrench counterclockwise to loosen the bolt. Clean the threads, and then use the crank puller tool by backing out the inner press, threading in the outer portion into the crank, and then using the press to remove the crank as shown. Inspect the crank and bottom bracket spindle and contact Rad Power Bikes product support if needed. At the left side of the bike, use the bottom bracket removal tool to remove the bottom bracket spindle cups. Insert the tool and the wrench so the handle points towards the front of the bike and is angled slightly upwards. This allows good leverage to press down and turn the wrench counterclockwise to loosen the cup. Once enough force has been applied and the cup is loose, remove the cup and set it aside. Repeat this on the right side of the bike, as shown, turning clockwise. Pull the bottom bracket spindle out of the frame, through the pedal assist sensor mount, and set aside. Use a clean paper towel to remove all grease, grit, and grime from the bottom bracket shell and threads. If needed, use a quick evaporating solvent such as denatured alcohol and follow the manufacturer's instructions to clean the shell and threads. Use caution to keep any solvent from making contact with plastics on the bike, such as the pedal assist sensor, magnet disc, and cable housing, since solvents can damage plastics. Wait until the bottom bracket shell and threads are completely dry. Do not use water or any water-based cleaners on the bottom bracket shell. They can require significant time to dry and can leave behind residue that can cause damage. Once the threads in the shell are completely dry, apply bicycle grease to the interior of the bottom bracket shell and all of the threads. Remove the old pedal assist sensor and bracket. Snip a zip tie if needed, then pull the connector apart without twisting to unplug. Recycle the part according to local electronics recycling rules. To install the new pedal assist sensor, line up the internal notch and pins and external arrows and press together without twisting to reconnect. Use a clean paper towel to wipe off any grease, dirt, or grit from the bottom bracket spindle and crank mounts, and then apply grease to the spindle, threads, and mounts. Place the pedal assist sensor mount into position with the screws facing the bike as shown, and then press the spindle through the pedal assist sensor mount and into the bottom bracket shell. Carefully thread the right side spindle cup by hand, counterclockwise to tighten. The spindle cups should thread easily. Do not cross threads or damage threads, and repeat with the left side of the spindle cup, turning clockwise to tighten. Torque both sides of the bottom bracket to 60 Newton meters, or 44 foot-pounds. Reinstall the magnet disc on the right crank mount as shown. Press the ring into the mount and twist it clockwise to move the disc as close as possible to the pedal assist sensor without the disc touching the sensor. To reinstall the cranks, position the right crank and chainring as shown, and then press onto the right crank arm mount. Apply a small amount of blue thread locker to the crank arm bolt and thread the bolt into the mount. Use caution to keep the thread locker from making contact with any plastics. Orient the left crank arm so it is in line with the right crank with the pedals on opposite ends. Repeat the process to install the left crank arm bolt. Use a torque wrench with an 8mm Allen bit to torque each bolt to 35 Newton meters. Replace the zip tie and snip off the excess so it's flush and smooth and the cable is clear of any moving parts. Push the derailleur housing forward to create chain slack and use a paper towel or the shaft of an Allen wrench to lift the chain onto the teeth of the chainring. Prop the bike up on the kickstand so the rear wheel is off the ground, rotate the cranks forwards to revolve the rear wheel, and ensure the chain is properly mounted on the chainring. Reinstall the battery, test the bike fully, and reach out to Rad Power Bikes product support if you have any questions, and ride rad.